Nothing could survive these waters for 8 hours. Vasikan held out his empty cup. Don't you have something stronger? I know you always keep a flask hidden somewhere. Liobhan reached for his hip pocket, but stopped when the walkie-talkie on his belt began to emit static. 3 short bursts. 3 squawks. That's the signal. The signal for what? Liobhan hurried down the docks, shouting back over his shoulder. 3 squawks on the radio. It means that the K9 unit has found someone. The survivor was not Russian, that much was obvious from his clothes. Everything from the Gore-Tex boots to the leather overcoat had obviously been purchased in Western Europe, perhaps even America. They were tailored to fit, and made from the highest quality material. Though the man's clothes were relatively intact, his body had not fared so well. His bare hands were mottled with frostbite. One leg had been snapped below the knee, and his face was a horrific mask of burns. The search crew had carried him from a ravine 3 clicks south of the harbor on a makeshift tarpaulin stretcher. The men crowded around their prize, stamping their feet against the cold that invaded their boots. Vasikan elbowed his way through the gathering, kneeling for a closer look. He'll lose the leg for sure, he noted. A couple of fingers, too. The face doesn't look too good either. Thank you, Dr. Mikkel, commented Kamar dryly. Any ID? Vasikan conducted a quick thief's search. Wallet and watch. Nothing. That's odd. You'd think a rich man like this would have some personal effects, wouldn't you? Kamar nodded. Yes, I would. He turned to the circle of men. 10 seconds, then there'll be trouble. Keep the currency, I need everything else. The sailors considered it. The man was not big. But he was Mafia, the Russian organized crime syndicate. A leather wallet sailed over the crowd, skidding into a dip in the tarpaulin. Moments later it was joined by a Cartier chronograph. Gold with diamond studding. Worth 5 years of an average Russian's wages. Wise decision, said Kamar, scooping up the treasure trove. Well, asked Vasikan. Do we keep him? Kamar pulled a platinum Visa card from the kidskin wallet, checking the name. Oh, we keep him, he replied, activating his cell phone. We keep him, and put some blankets over him. The way our luck's going, he'll catch pneumonia. And believe me, we don't want anything to happen to this man. He's our ticket to the big time. Kamar was getting excited. This was completely out of character for him. Vasikan clambered to his feet. Who are you calling? Who is this guy? Kamar picked a number from his speed dial menu. I'm calling Britva. Who do you think I'm calling? Vasikan paled. Even calling the boss was dangerous. Britva was well known for shooting the bearers of bad news. It's good news, right? You're calling with good news. Kamar flipped the visa at his partner. Read that. Vasikan studied the card for several moments. I don't read Angliski. What does it say? What's the name? Kamar told him. A slow smile spread across Mikkel's face. Make the call, he said. Artemis Fowl, a psychological assessment from The Teenage Years, by Professor J. Argan, Brotherhood of Psychologists, commissioned by the Lower Elements Police by the age of 13. Our subject, Artemis Fowl, was displaying signs of an intellect greater than any human since Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Artemis had beaten European chess champion Evan Khashoggi in an online tournament, patented more than 27 inventions, and won the architectural competition to design Dublin's new opera house. He had also written a computer program that diverted millions of dollars from Swiss accounts to his own, forged more than a dozen impressionist paintings that now hang in various galleries worldwide, and cheated the fairy people out of a substantial amount of gold. The question is, why? What drove Artemis to get involved in criminal enterprises? The answer lies with his father. Artemis Fowl Sr. was the head of a criminal empire that stretched from Dublin's docklands to the back streets of Tokyo, but he had had ambitions to establish himself as a legitimate businessman. Artemis Fowl Sr. had bought a cargo ship, stocked it with 250,000 cans of cola, and set course for Murmansk in northern Russia, where he had arranged a business deal that could prove profitable for decades to come. Unfortunately, the Russian mafia decided they did not want an Irish tycoon cutting himself a slice of their market, and sank the Fowl Star in the Bay of Kola. Artemis Fowl I was declared missing, presumed dead. Artemis Jr. was now the head of an empire with limited funds. In order to restore the family fortune, he embarked on a criminal career that would earn him over £15 million in 2 short years. This vast fortune was mainly spent financing rescue expeditions to Russia. Artemis refused to believe that his father was dead, even though every passing day made it seem more likely. Artemis avoided other teenagers and resented being sent to school, preferring to spend his time plotting his next crime. So, even though his involvement with the Goblin Uprising during this year was to be traumatic, terrifying, and dangerous, it was probably the best thing that could have happened to him. At least he spent some time outdoors, and got to meet some new people. It's a pity most of them were trying to kill him. Prologue: Murmansk, northern Russia, 2 years before the two Russians huddled around a flaming barrel in a futile attempt to ward off the Arctic chill. The Gulf of Kola was not a place you wanted to be after September, especially not Murmansk. In Murmansk, even the polar bears wore scarves. Nowhere was colder, except perhaps Norilsk. The men were mafia enforcers, and were more used to spending their evenings inside stolen BMWs. The large gangster, Mikhail Vasykin, checked the fake Rolex beneath the sleeve of his fur coat. "This thing could freeze up," he said, checking the diving bezel. "What am I going to do with it then?" "Stop your complaining," said the one called Kamar. "It's your fault we're stuck outside in the first place." Vasykin paused. "Pardon me. Our orders were simple. Sink the Fowl Star. All you had to do was blow the cargo bay. It was a big enough ship, heaven knows. Blow the cargo bay, and down she goes. But no, the great Vasykin hits the stern. Not even a backup rocket to finish the job. So now we have to search for survivors. She sank, didn't she?" Kamar shrugged. "So what? She sank slowly, plenty of time for the passengers to grab onto something." Vasykin, the famous sharpshooter. "My grandmother could shoot better." Lyubhan, the mafia's man on the docks, approached before the discussion could develop into an all-out brawl. "How are things?" asked the bear-like Yakut. Vasykin spat over the quay wall. "How do you think? Did you find anything?" "Dead fish and broken crates," said the Yakut, offering both enforcers a steaming mug. "Nothing alive. It's been over 8 hours now. I have good men searching all the way down to Green Cape." Kamar drank deeply, then spat in disgust. "What is this stuff?" "Pitch." Lyubhan laughed. "Hot cola. From the Fowl Star. It's coming ashore by the crate load. Tonight we are truly on the Bay of Kola. Be warned," said Vasykin, spilling the liquid into the snow. "This weather is souring my temper. So no more terrible jokes. It's enough that I have to listen to Kamar." "Not for much longer," muttered his partner. "One more sweep, and we call off the search." Artemis Fowl, a psychological assessment from The Teenage Years, by Professor J. Argan, Brotherhood of Psychologists, commissioned by the Lower Elements Police by the age of 13. Our subject, Artemis Fowl, was displaying signs of an intellect greater than any human since Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Artemis had beaten European chess champion Evan Khashoggi in an online tournament, patented more than 27 inventions, and won the architectural competition to design Dublin's new Opera House. He had also written a computer program that diverted millions of dollars from Swiss accounts to his own, forged more than a dozen impressionist paintings that now hang in various galleries worldwide, and cheated the fairy people out of a substantial amount of gold. The question is, why? What drove Artemis to get involved in criminal enterprises? The answer lies with his father. Artemis Fowl Sr. was the head of a criminal empire that stretched from Dublin's Docklands to the back streets of Tokyo, but he had had ambitions to establish himself as a legitimate businessman. Artemis Fowl Sr. had bought a cargo ship, stocked it with 250,000 cans of cola, and set course for Murmansk in northern Russia, where he had arranged a business deal that could prove profitable for decades to come. Unfortunately, the Russian mafia decided they did not want an Irish tycoon cutting himself a slice of their market, and sank the Fowl Star in the Bay of Kola. Artemis Fowl I was declared missing, presumed dead. Artemis Jr. was now the head of an empire with limited funds. In order to restore the family fortune, he embarked on a criminal career that would earn him over £15 million in 2 short years. This vast fortune was mainly spent financing rescue expeditions to Russia. Artemis refused to believe that his father was dead, even though every passing day made it seem more likely. Artemis avoided other teenagers and resented being sent to school, preferring to spend his time plotting his next crime. So, even though his involvement with the Goblin Uprising during this year was to be traumatic, terrifying, and dangerous, it was probably the best thing that could have happened to him. At least he spent some time outdoors, and got to meet some new people. It's a pity most of them were trying to kill him. Prologue: Murmansk, northern Russia, 2 years before the two Russians huddled around a flaming barrel in a futile attempt to ward off the Arctic chill. The Gulf of Kola was not a place you wanted to be after September, especially not Murmansk. In Murmansk, even the polar bears wore scarves. Nowhere was colder, except perhaps Norilsk. The men were mafia enforcers, and were more used to spending their evenings inside stolen BMWs. The large gangster, Mikhail Vasikin, checked the fake Rolex beneath the sleeve of his fur coat. "This thing could freeze up," he said, checking the diving bezel. "What am I going to do with it then?" "Stop your complaining," said the one called Kamar. "It's your fault we're stuck outside in the first place." Vasikin paused. "Pardon me. Our orders were simple. Sink the Fowl Star. All you had to do was blow the cargo bay. It was a big enough ship, heaven knows. Blow the cargo bay, and down she goes. But no, the great Vasikin hits the stern. Not even a backup rocket to finish the job. So now we have to search for survivors. She sank, didn't she?" Kamar shrugged. "So what? She sank slowly, plenty of time for the passengers to grab onto something." Vasikin, the famous sharpshooter. "My grandmother could shoot better." Lyubhin, the mafia's man on the docks, approached before the discussion could develop into an all-out brawl. "How are things?" asked the bear-like Yakut. Vasikin spat over the quay wall. "How do you think? Did you find anything?" "Dead fish and broken crates," said the Yakut, offering both enforcers a steaming mug. "Nothing alive. It's been over 8 hours now. I have good men searching all the way down to Green Cape." Kamar drank deeply, then spat in disgust. "What is this stuff?" "Pitch." Lyubhin laughed. "Hot cola. From the Fowl Star. It's coming ashore by the crate load. Tonight we are truly on the Bay of Kola. Be warned," said Vasikin, spilling the liquid into the snow. "This weather is souring my temper. So no more terrible jokes. It's enough that I have to listen to Kamar." "Not for much longer," muttered his partner. "One more sweep, and we call off the search. Nothing could survive these waters for 8 hours. Vasikin held out his empty cup. "Don't you have something stronger? I know you always keep a flask hidden somewhere." Lyubhin reached for his hip pocket, but stopped when the walkie-talkie on his belt began to emit static. 3 short bursts. 3 squawks. "That's the signal." "The signal for what?" Lyubhin hurried down the docks, shouting back over his shoulder. 3 squawks on the radio. "It means that the K9 unit has found someone. The survivor was not Russian, that much was obvious from his clothes. Everything from the Gore-Tex boots to the leather overcoat had obviously been purchased in Western Europe, perhaps even America. They were tailored to fit, and made from the highest quality material. Though the man's clothes were relatively intact, his body had not fared so well. His bare hands were mottled with frostbite. One leg had been snapped below the knee, and his face was a horrific mask of burns. The search crew had carried him from a ravine 3 clicks south of the harbor on a makeshift tarpaulin stretcher. The men crowded around their prize, stamping their feet against the cold that invaded their boots. Vasikin elbowed his way through the gathering, kneeling for a closer look. "He'll lose the leg for sure," he noted. "A couple of fingers, too. The face doesn't look too good either." "Thank you, Dr. Mikhail," commented Kamar dryly. "Any ID?" Vasikin conducted a quick thief's search. "Wallet and watch." "Nothing. That's odd. You'd think a rich man like this would have some personal effects, wouldn't you?" Kamar nodded. "Yes, I would." He turned to the circle of men. 10 seconds, then there'll be trouble. Keep the currency, I need everything else." The sailors considered it. The man was not big. But he was mafia, the Russian organized crime syndicate. A leather wallet sailed over the crowd, skidding into a dip in the tarpaulin. Moments later it was joined by a Cartier chronograph. Gold with diamond studding. Worth 5 years of an average Russian's wages. Wise decision, said Kamar, scooping up the treasure trove. Well, asked Vasikin. Do we keep him? Kamar pulled a platinum Visa card from the kidskin wallet, checking the name. Oh, we keep him, he replied, activating his cell phone. We keep him, and put some blankets over him. The way our luck's going, he'll catch pneumonia. And believe me, we don't want anything to happen to this man. He's our ticket to the big time. Kamar was getting excited. This was completely out of character for him. Vasikin clambered to his feet. Who are you calling? Who is this guy? Kamar picked a number from his speed dial menu. I'm calling Britva. Who do you think I'm calling? Vasikin paled. Even calling the boss was dangerous. Britva was well known for shooting the bearers of bad news. It's good news, right? You're calling with good news. Kamar flipped the Visa at his partner. Read that. Vasikin studied the card for several moments. I don't read Angliski. What does it say? What's the name? Kamar told him. A slow smile spread across Mikkel's face. Make the call, he said. Firstly, there's your associate, Butler. A bodyguard, I understand. Hardly a suitable companion for an impressionable boy. Then there's your mother. A wonderful woman in my opinion, but with absolutely no control over your behavior. Finally, there's your father. According to this, he wasn't much of a role model, even when he was alive. The remark stung, but Artemis wasn't about to let the doctor realize how much. Your file is mistaken, doctor, he said. My father is alive. Missing perhaps, but alive. Poe checked the sheet. Really? I was under the impression that he has been missing for almost 2 years. Why? The courts have declared him legally dead. Artemis's voice was devoid of emotion, though his heart was pounding. I don't care what the courts say, or the Red Cross. He is alive, and I will find him. Poe scratched another note. But even if your father were to return, what then? He asked. Will you follow in his footsteps? Will you be a criminal like him? Perhaps you already are. My father was no criminal, Artemis said testily. He was moving all our assets into legitimate enterprises. The Murmansk venture was completely above board. You're avoiding the question, Artemis, said Poe. But Artemis had had enough of this line of questioning. Time to play a little game. Why, doctor, said Artemis, shocked. This is a sensitive area. For all you know, I could be suffering from depression. I suppose you could, said Poe, sensing a breakthrough. Is that the case? Artemis dropped his face into his hands. It's my mother, doctor. Your mother? Prompted Poe, trying to keep the excitement from his voice. Artemis had caused 6 counselors to retire from St. Bartleby's already this year. Truth be told, Poe was on the point of packing his own bags. But now, my mother, she. Quote. Poe leaned forward on his fake Victorian chair. Your mother, yes. She forces me to endure this ridiculous therapy, when the so-called counselors are little better than misguided do-gooders with degrees. Poe sighed. Very well, Artemis. Have it your way, but you are never going to find peace if you continue to run away from your problems. Artemis was spared further analysis by the vibration of his cell phone. He had a coded secure line. Only one person had the number. The boy retrieved it from his pocket, flipping open the tiny communicator. Yes. Butler's voice came through the speaker. Artemis. It's me. Obviously. I'm in the middle of something here. We've had a message. Yes. From where? I don't know exactly. But it concerns the Fowl Star. A jolt raced up Artemis's spine. Where are you? The main gate. Good man. I'm on my way. Dr. Poe whipped off his glasses. This session is not over, young man. We made some progress today, even if you won't admit it. Leave now, and I will be forced to inform the dean. The warning was lost on Artemis. He was already somewhere else. A familiar electric buzz was crackling over his skin. This was the beginning of something. He could feel it. Concentrate, Private. We could be up to our necks in a firefight at any second. I doubt it, Captain. This place is quiet as the grave. I love assignments like this. Nice and easy. Just cruisin'. Holly surveyed the scene below. Verbal was right. The once thriving suburb had become a ghost town with the chute's closure to the public. Only the occasional foraging troll stumbled past their pods. When trolls began staking out territory in an area, you knew it was deserted. It's you and me, Cap. And the night's still young. Stow it, Verbal. Keep your mind on the job. Or isn't private a low enough rank for you? Yes, Holly. Sorry, I mean, yes, sir. Sprites. They were all the same. Give a fairy a pair of wings and he thought he was irresistible. Holly chewed her lip. They'd wasted enough taxpayers' gold on this stakeout. The brass should just call it a day, but they wouldn't. Surveillance duty was ideal for keeping embarrassing officers out of the public eye. In spite of this, Holly was determined to do the job to the best of her ability. The Internal Affairs Tribunal wasn't going to have any extra ammunition to throw at her if she could help it. Holly called up their daily pod checklist on the plasma screen. The gauges for the pneumatic clamps were in the green. Plenty of gas to keep their pod hanging there for 4 long boring weeks. Next on the list was thermal imaging. Chicks, I want you to do a flyby. We'll run a thermal. Verbal grinned. Sprites loved to fly. Roger, Captain, he said, strapping a thermoscan bar to his chest. Holly opened a hole in the pod, and Verbal swooped out, climbing quickly to the shadows. The bar on his chest bathed the area below with heat-sensitive rays. Holly punched up the thermoscan program on her computer. The view screen swam with fuzzy images in various shades of gray. Any living creature would show up even behind a layer of solid rock. But there was nothing, just a few swear-toads and the tail end of a troll shambling off the screen. Verbal's voice crackled over the speaker. Hey, Captain, should I take in for a closer look? That was the trouble with portable scanners. The further away you were, the weaker the rays became. Okay, chicks. One more sweep. Be careful. Don't worry, Holly. The chicks man will keep himself in one piece for you. Holly drew a breath to make a threatening reply, but the retort died in her throat. On the screen, something was moving. Chicks. You getting this? Affirmative, Cap. I'm getting it, but I dunno what I'm getting. Holly enhanced a section of the screen. 2 beings were moving around on the second level. The beings were gray. Chicks. Hold your position. Continue scanning. Gray. How could gray things be moving? Gray was dead. No heat, cold as the grave. Nevertheless, on your guard, Private Verbal. We have possible hostiles. Holly opened a channel to Police Plaza. Foley, the LEP's technical wizard, would undoubtedly have their video feed running in the operations booth. Foley. You watching? Yep, Holly, answered the centaur. Just bringing you up on the main screen. What do you make of these shapes? Moving gray. I've never seen anything like it. Me neither. There followed a brief silence, punctuated by the clicking of a keyboard. 2 possible explanations. 1. Equipment malfunction. These could be phantom images from another system. Like interference on a radio. The other explanation. Chapter 2 Cruisin', for chicks the lower elements, Haven City, West Bank. The traditional image of a leprechaun is of a small, green-suited imp. Of course, this is the human image. Fairies have their own stereotypes. The people generally imagine officers of the lower elements police reconnaissance squad to be truculent gnomes or bulked-up elves, recruited straight from their college crunchball squads. Captain Holly Short fits neither of these descriptions. In fact, she would probably be the last person you would pick as a member of the LE Precon squad. If you had to guess her occupation, the cat-like stance and the sinewy muscle might suggest a gymnast, or perhaps a professional spelunker. But if you took a closer look past the pretty face, into the eyes, you would see determination so fiery it could light a candle at 10 paces, and a streetwise intelligence that made her one of the recon squad's most respected officers. Of course, technically, Holly was no longer attached to recon. Ever since the Artemis Fowl affair, when she had been captured and held for ransom, her position as recon's first female officer had been under review. The only reason she wasn't at home watering her ferns right now was that Commander Root had threatened to turn in his own badge if Holly was suspended. Root knew, even if Internal Affairs wasn't convinced, that the kidnapping had not been Holly's fault, and only her quick thinking had prevented loss of life. But the council members weren't particularly interested in loss of human life, they were more concerned with loss of fairy gold. And according to them, Holly had cost them quite a chunk from the Recon Ransom Fund. Holly was quite prepared to fly above ground and wring Artemis Fowl's neck until he returned the gold, but that wasn't the way it worked. The book, the Fairy Bible, stated that once a human managed to separate fairies from their gold, then that gold was his to keep. So instead of confiscating her badge, Internal Affairs had insisted Holly handle grunt work somewhere she couldn't do any harm. Stakeout was the obvious choice. So, Holly was farmed out to Customs and Excise, stuck in a cam pod, and suckered to the rock face overlooking a pressure elevator chute. Dead-end duty. Smuggling was a serious concern for the lower elements police. It wasn't the contraband itself, which was generally harmless junk, designer sunglasses, DVDs, cappuccino machines, and such. It was the method of acquiring these items. The Beaver-Kell Goblin Triad had cornered the smuggling market, and was becoming increasingly brazen in its above-ground excursions. It was even rumored that the goblins had constructed their own cargo shuttle to make their expeditions more economically viable. The problem was that goblins were dim-witted creatures. All it would take would be for one of them to forget to shield, and goblin photos would be bouncing from satellites to news stations around the world. Then the lower elements, the last mud people free zone on the planet, would be discovered. When that happened, human nature being what it was, pollution, strip mining, and exploitation were sure to follow. This meant that whatever poor souls were in the department's bad books got to spend months at a time on surveillance duty, which is why Holly was now anchored to the rock face outside a little-used chute's entrance. E37 was a pressure elevator that emerged in downtown Paris, France. The European capital was red-flagged as a high-risk area, so visas were rarely approved. LEP business only. No one had been in the chute for decades, but it still merited 24/7 surveillance. Which meant 6 officers on 8-hour shifts. Holly was saddled with Chick's verbal for a pod mate. Like most sprites, Chicks believed himself God's green-skinned gift to females, and spent more time trying to impress Holly than doing his job. "Lookin' good tonight, Captain," was Chicks's opening line that particular night. "You do something with your hair." Holly adjusted the screen focus, wondering what you could do with an auburn crew cut. Chapter 1 Family ties. The loss of her husband had had a profound effect on Angeline Fowl. She had retreated to her room, refusing to go outside. She had taken refuge in her mind, preferring dreams of the past to real life. It is doubtful that she would have recovered had not her son, Artemis II, done a deal with the elf Holly Short, his mother's sanity in return for half the ransom gold he had stolen from the fairy police. His mother safely restored, Artemis Jr. focused his efforts on locating his father, investing large chunks of the family fortune in Russian excursions, local intelligence, and internet search companies. Young Artemis had received a double share of foul guile. But with the recovery of his mother, a moral and beautiful lady, it became increasingly difficult for him to realize his ingenious schemes that were ever more necessary to fund the search for his father. Angeline, distraught over her son's obsession and afraid of the effects of the past year on Artemis's mind, signed her 13-year-old up for treatment with the school counselor. You have to feel sorry for him. The counselor, that is. St. Bartleby's School for Young Gentlemen, County Wicklow, Ireland. Present-day Dr. Poe leaned back in his padded armchair, eyes flicking across the page in front of him. Now, Master Fowl, let's talk, shall we? Artemis sighed deeply, smoothing his dark hair back from a wide, pale brow. When would people learn that a mind such as his could not be dissected? He himself had read more psychology textbooks than the counselor. He had even contributed an article to the Psychologist's Journal, under the pseudonym Dr. F. Roy Dean Schlip. Certainly, Doctor. Let's talk about your chair. Victorian. Poe rubbed the leather arm fondly. Yes, quite correct. Something of a family heirloom. My grandfather acquired it at auction in Sotheby's. Apparently it once stood in the palace. The Queen's favorite. A taut smile stretched Artemis's lips perhaps half an inch. Really, Doctor? They don't generally allow fakes in the palace. Poe's grip stretched the worn leather. Fake? I assure you, Master Fowl, this is completely authentic. Artemis leaned in for a closer examination. It's clever, I grant you. But look here. Poe's gaze followed the youth's finger. Those furniture tacks. See the crisscross pattern on the head. Machine tooled. 1920 at the earliest. Your grandfather was duped. But what matter? A chair is a chair. A possession of no importance, Doctor? Poe scribbled furiously, burying his dismay. Yes, Artemis, very clever. Just as your file says. Playing your little games. Now shall we get back to you? Artemis Fowl II straightened the crease in his trousers. There is a problem here, Doctor. Really? And what might that be? The problem is that I know the textbook answers to any question you care to ask. Dr. Poe jotted in his pad for a full minute. We do have a problem, Artemis. But that's not it, he said eventually. Artemis almost smiled. No doubt the doctor would treat him to another predictable theory. Which disorder would he have today? Multiple personality perhaps, or maybe he'd be a pathological liar. The problem is that you don't respect anyone enough to treat them as an equal. Artemis was thrown by the statement. This doctor was smarter than the rest. That's ridiculous. I hold several people in the highest esteem. Poe did not glance up from his notebook. Really? Who, for example? Artemis thought for a moment. Albert Einstein. His theories were usually correct. And Archimedes, the Greek mathematician. What about someone whom you actually know? Artemis thought hard. No one came to mind. What? No examples. Artemis shrugged. You seem to have all the answers, Dr. Poe, why don't you tell me? Poe opened a window on his laptop. Extraordinary. Every time I read this, my biography, I presume. Yes, it explains a lot. Such as, asked Artemis, interested in spite of himself. Dr. Poe printed off a page. On your very first day in the Lep Academy, a big, hairy gnome with a chest the size of a bull trolls pins each cadet to a wall and warns them never to run into an unsecured building during a firefight. He says this in a most insistent fashion. He repeats it every day, until the maxim is etched on every cadet's brain. Nevertheless, this was exactly what Captain Hollyshort of L.E. Precon proceeded to do. She blasted the terminal's double doors, diving through to the shelter of a check-in desk. Less than 400 years ago, this building had been a hive of activity, with tourists lining up for above-ground visas. Paris had once been a very popular tourist destination. But, inevitably it seemed, humans had claimed the European capital for themselves. The only place fairies felt safe was in Disneyland Paris, where no one looked twice at diminutive creatures, even if they were green. Holly activated a motion sensor filter in her helmet and scanned the building through the desk's quartz security panel. If anything moved, the helmet's computer would automatically flag it with an orange corona. She looked up just in time to see two figures loping along a viewing gallery toward the shuttle bay. They were goblins, all right, reverting to all fours for extra speed, trailing a hover trolley behind them. They were wearing some kind of reflective foil suits, complete with headgear, obviously to fool the thermal sensors. Very clever. Too clever for goblins. Holly ran parallel to the goblins, one floor down. All around her, ancient advertisements sagged in their brackets. 2-week solstice tour. 20 ounces of gold. Children under 10 travel free. She vaulted the turnstile gate, racing past the security zone and duty-free booths. The goblins were descending now, boots and gloves flapping on a frozen escalator. One lost his headgear in his haste. He was big for a goblin, over 3 feet. His lidless eyes rolled in panic, and his forked tongue flicked upward to moisten his pupils. Captain Short squeezed off a few bursts on the run. One clipped the backside of the nearest goblin. Holly groaned. Nowhere near a nerve center. But it didn't have to be. There was a disadvantage to those foil suits. They conducted neutrino charges. The charge spread through the suit's material like fiery ripples across a pond. The goblin jumped a good 6 feet straight up, then tumbled unconscious to the foot of the escalator. The hover trolley spun out of control, crashing into a luggage carousel. Hundreds of small cylindrical objects spilled from a shattered crate. Goblin number 2 fired a dozen rounds Holly's way. He missed, partly because his arms were jittery with nerves, but also because firing from the hip only works in the movies. Holly tried to take a screenshot of his weapon with her helmet camera for the computer to run a match on, but there was too much vibration. The chase continued down the conduits and into the departure area itself. Holly was surprised to hear the hum of docking computers. There wasn't supposed to be any power here. LEP engineering would have dismantled the generators. Why would power be needed here? She already knew the answer. Power would be needed to operate the shuttle monorail and mission control. Her suspicions were confirmed as she entered the hangar. The goblins had built a shuttle. It was unbelievable. Goblins had barely enough electricity in their brains to power a 10-watt bulb. How could they possibly build a shuttle? Yet there it was, sitting in the dock like a used craft seller's worst nightmare. There wasn't a bit of it less than a decade old, and the hull was a patchwork of weld spots and rivets. Holly swallowed her amazement, concentrating on the pursuit. The goblin had paused to grab a set of wings from the cargo hold. She could have taken a shot then, but it was too risky. She wouldn't be surprised if the shuttle's nuclear battery was protected by nothing more than a single layer of lead. The goblin took advantage of his reprieve to skip down the access tunnel. The monorail ran the length of the scorched rock to the massive chute. The chutes were natural vents that riddled the Earth's mantle and crust. Magma streams from the planet's molten core blasted toward the surface at irregular intervals. If it wasn't for these pressure releases, the Earth would have shaken itself to fragments eons since. It's so ludicrous that I hardly like to mention it. Yeah, well, do me a favor, Foley, mention it. Well, ridiculous as it sounds, someone may have found a way to beat my system. Holly paled. If Foley was even admitting the possibility, then it was almost definitely true. She cut the centaur off, switching her attention back to private verbal. Chicks, get out of there. Pull up, pull up. The sprite was far too busy trying to impress his pretty captain to realize the seriousness of his situation. Relax, Holly. I'm a sprite. Nobody can hit a sprite. That was when a projectile erupted through a chute window, blowing a fist-sized hole in Verbal's wing. Holly tucked a Neutrino 2000 into its holster, issuing commands through her helmet's comm set. Code 14, repeat code 14. Fairy down. Fairy down. We are under fire. E-37. Send warlock medics and backup. Holly dropped through the hatch, rappelling to the tunnel floor. She ducked behind a statue of Frond, the first elfin king. Chix was lying on a mound of rubble across the avenue. It didn't look good. The side of his helmet had been bashed in by the jagged remains of a low wall, rendering his comm set completely useless. She needed to reach him soon, or he was a goner. Sprites only had limited healing powers. They could magic away a wart, but gaping wounds were beyond them. I'm patching you through to the commander, said Foley's voice in her ear. Stand by. Commander Root's gravelly tones barked across the airwaves. He did not sound in the best of moods. No surprises there. Captain Short. I want you to hold your position until backup gets there. Negative, Commander. Chix is hit. I have to reach him. Holly. Captain Kelp is minutes away. Hold your position. Repeat. Hold your position. Behind the helmet's visor, Holly gritted her teeth in frustration. She was one step from being booted out of the LEP, and now this. To rescue Chix, she would have to disobey a direct order. Root sensed her indecision. Holly, listen to me. Whatever they're shooting at you punched straight through Verbal's wing. Your LEP vest is no good. So sit tight and wait for Captain Kelp. Captain Kelp. Possibly the LEP's most gung-ho officer, famous for choosing the name trouble at his graduation ceremony. Still, there was no officer Holly would prefer to have at her back going through a door. Sorry, sir, I can't wait. Chix took a hit in the wing. You know what that means. Shooting a sprite in the wing was not like shooting a bird. Wings were a sprite's largest organ and contained 7 major arteries. A hole like that would have ruptured at least 3. Commander Root sighed. Over the speakers it sounded like a rush of static. Okay, Holly. But stay low. I don't want to lose any of my people today. Holly drew her Neutrino 2000 from its holster, flicking the setting up to 3. She wasn't taking any chances with the snipers. Presuming they were goblins from the Biwa-Kel triad, on a 3 setting, the first shot would knock them unconscious for 8 hours at the very least. She gathered her legs beneath her, and rocketed out from behind the statue. Immediately a hail of gunfire blew chunks from the structure. Holly raced toward her fallen comrade, projectiles buzzing around her head like supersonic bees. Generally, in a situation of this kind, the last thing you do would be to move the victim, but with gunfire raining down on him, there was no choice. Holly grabbed the private by his epaulets, hauling him behind a rusted-out delivery shuttle. Chicks had been out there a long time. He was grinning feebly. You came for me, Cap. I knew you would. Holly tried to keep the worry from her voice. Of course I came, Chicks. Never leave a man behind. I knew you couldn't resist me, he breathed. I knew it. Then he closed his eyes. There was a lot of damage done here. Maybe too much. Holly concentrated on the wound. Heal, she thought, and the magic welled up inside her like a million pins and needles. It spread through her arms and ran down to her fingers. She placed her hands on Verbal's wound. Blue sparks tingled from her fingers into the hole. The sparks played around the wound, repairing the scorched tissue and replicating spilt blood. The sprite's breathing calmed, and a healthy green tinge started to return to his cheeks. Holly sighed. Chicks would be okay. He probably wouldn't fly any more missions on that wing, but he would live. Holly lay the unconscious sprite on his side, careful not to put. After an eternity the roaring stopped, and Holly opened her eyes to a tunnel full of steam. She activated the demister in her visor and got up off her knees. Water slid in sheets from her non-friction suit. She released her helmet seals, taking deep breaths of tunnel air. Still warm, but breathable. Behind her the blast doors slid open, and Captain Troublekelp appeared in the gap along with an LEP rapid response team. Nice maneuver, Captain. Holly didn't answer, too absorbed by the weapon abandoned by the recently vaporized goblin. This was the prize pig of rifles, almost 2 feet long, with a starlight scope clipped above the barrel. Holly's first thought had been that somehow the Biwa-Kel were manufacturing their own weapons. But now she realized that the truth was far more dangerous. Captain Short pried the rifle from the half-melted rock. She recognized it from her history of law enforcement in service. An old soft-nose laser. Soft-noses had been outlawed long ago. But that wasn't the worst of it. Instead of a fairy power source, the gun was powered by a human AA alkaline battery. Trouble, she called. Have a look at this. David, breathed Kelp, reaching immediately for the radio controls on his helmet. Get me a priority channel to Commander Root. We have Class A contraband. Yes, Class A. I need a full team of techies. Get Foley, too. I want this entire quadrant shut down. ... Quote. Trouble continued spouting orders, but they faded to a distant buzz in Holly's ears. The Biwa-Kel were trading with the Mud Men. Humans and goblins working together to reactivate outlawed weapons. And if the weapons were here, how long could it be before the Mud Men followed? Help arrived just after the nick of time. In 30 minutes there were so many halogen spotlights buzzing around E37 that it looked like a Golem World movie premiere. Foley was down on his knees examining the unconscious goblin by the escalator. Foley was the main reason that humans hadn't yet discovered the people's underground lairs. He was a technical genius who had pioneered every major development from flare prediction to mind-wiping technology. Every discovery made him less respectful and more annoying. But rumor had it that he had a soft spot for a certain female recon officer. Actually, the only female recon officer. Good job, Holly, he said, rubbing the goblin's reflective suit. You just had a firefight with a kebab. That's it, Foley, draw attention away from the fact that the Biwa-Kel fooled your senses. Foley tried on one of the helmets. Not the Biwa-Kel. No way. Too dumb. Goblins just don't have the cranial capacity. These are human manufacture. Holly snorted. And how do you know that? Recognize the stitching. Nope, replied Foley, tossing the helmet to Holly. Holly read the label. Made in Germany. I'd guess that this is a fire suit. The material keeps the heat out as well as in. This is serious, Holly. We're not talking a couple of designer shirts and a case of chocolate bars here. Some human is doing some serious smuggling with the Biwa Kel. Foley stepped out of the way to allow the technical crew access to their prisoner. The techies would tag the unconscious goblin with a subcutaneous sleeper. The sleeper contained microcapsules of a sedative agent and a tiny detonator. Once tagged, a criminal could be knocked out by computer if the LEP realized he was involved in an illegal situation. You know who's probably behind this, don't you? Said Holly. Foley rolled his eyes. Oh, let me guess. Captain Short's archenemy, Master Artemis Fowl. Well, who else could it be? Take your pick. The people have been in contact with thousands of mudmen over the years. Is that so? Retorted Holly. And how many that haven't been mind-wiped? Foley pretended to think about it, adjusting the foil hat jammed on his head to deflect any brain-probing signals that could be focused his way. 3, he muttered eventually. Pardon. 3, okay. Yes, Butler. Root paused. But remember, we're going to run a few scans, Holly, that's it. I don't want you using this as an opportunity to settle a score. No, sir. Strictly business. Do I have your word on that? Yes, sir. I guarantee it. Root ground the cigar butt beneath his heel. I don't want anyone else getting hurt today, not even Artemis Fowl. Understood. Well, added the commander. Not unless it's absolutely necessary. Chapter 3 Going underground. St. Bartleby's School for Young Gentlemen. Butler had been in Artemis Fowl's service since the moment of the boy's birth. He had spent the first night of his charge's life standing guard on the Sisters of Mercy maternity ward. For over a decade, Butler had been teacher, mentor, and protector to the young heir. The pair had never been separated for more than a week, until now. It shouldn't bother him, he knew that. A bodyguard should never become emotionally attached to his charge, it affects his judgment. But in his private moments, Butler couldn't help thinking of the Fowl heir as the younger brother he had never had. Butler parked the Bentley Arnage red label on the College Avenue. If anything, the Eurasian manservant had bulked up since midterm. With Artemis in boarding school, he was spending a lot more time in the gym. Truth be told, Butler was bored pumping iron, but the college authorities absolutely refused to allow him a bunk in Artemis's room. And when the gardener had discovered the bodyguard's hideout just off the 17th green, they had banned him from the school grounds altogether. Artemis slipped through the school's gate, Dr. Poe's comments still in his thoughts. Problems, sir, said Butler, noticing his employer's sour expression. Artemis ducked into the Bentley's wine-colored leather interior, selecting a bottle of still water from the bar. Hardly, Butler. Just another quack spouting psychobabble. Butler kept his voice level. Should I have a word with him? Never mind him now. What news of the Fowl Star? We got an email at the manor this morning. It's an MPG. Artemis scowled. He could not access MPG video files on his mobile phone. Butler pulled a portable computer from the glove compartment. I thought you might be anxious to see the file, so I downloaded it onto this. He passed the computer over his shoulder. Artemis activated the compact machine, folding out the flat color screen. At first he thought the battery was dead, then realized he was looking at a field of snow. White on white, with only the faintest shadows to indicate dips and drumlins. Exactly. Fowl and his pet gorillas. Artemis is behind this. Mark my words. You'd just love that to be the case now, wouldn't you? You'd finally get the chance to get your own back. You do remember what happened the last time the LEP went up against Artemis Fowl? I remember. But that was last time. Foley smirked. I would remind you that he'll be 13, now. Holly's hand dropped to her buzz baton. I don't care how old he is. One zap with this, and he'll be sleeping like a baby. Foley nodded toward the entrance. I'd save my charges if I were you. You're going to need them. Holly followed his gaze. Commander Julius Root was sweeping across the secured zone. The more he saw, the redder his face grew, hence the nickname Beetroot. Commander, began Holly. You need to see this. Root's gaze silenced her. What were you thinking? Pardon me, sir. Don't give me that. I was in ops for the whole thing. I was watching the video feed from your helmet. Oh, hardly covers it, Captain. Root's buzz-cut grey hair was quivering with emotion. This was supposed to be a surveillance mission. There were several backup squads sitting on their well-trained behinds only waiting for you to call. But no, Captain Short decides to take on the Biwakel on her own. I had a man down, sir. There was no choice. What was Verbal doing out there in the first place? For the first time, Holly's gaze dropped. I sent him out to do a thermal, sir. Just following regulations. Root nodded. I just talked to the paramedic Warlock. Verbal will be okay, but his flying days are over. There'll be a tribunal, of course. Yes, sir. Understood. A formality, I'm sure, but you know the council. Holly knew the council all too well. She would be the first LEP officer in history to be the subject of 2 simultaneous investigations. So what's this I hear about a Class A? All contraband was classed. Class A was code for dangerous human technology. Power sources, for instance. This way, sir. Holly led him to the rear of the maintenance area, to the shuttle bay itself. A translucent restricted access perspex dome had been erected in the shuttle bay. Holly pressed through the frosted entrance flaps. You see, this is serious. Root studied the evidence. In the shuttle's cargo bay were crates of AA batteries. Holly selected a pack. Pencil batteries, she said. A common human power source. Crude, inefficient, and an environmental disaster. 12 crates of them right here. Who knows how many are in the tunnels already? Root was unimpressed. Forgive me for not quaking in my boots. So a few goblins get to play human video games. So what? Foley had spotted the goblin's soft-nose laser. Oh no, he said, checking the weapon. Exactly, agreed Holly. The commander did not appreciate being left out of the conversation. Oh no, he mimicked them. I hope you're just being melodramatic. No, Chief, replied the centaur, somber for once. This is deadly serious. The Biwakel are using human batteries to power the old soft-nose lasers. They'd only get about 6 shots per battery. But you give every goblin a pocketful of power cells, and that's a lot of shots. Soft-nose lasers. They were outlawed decades ago. Weren't they all recycled? Foley nodded. Supposedly. My division supervised the meltdowns. Not that we considered it priority, they were originally powered by a single solar cell, with a lifespan of less than a decade. Obviously, somebody managed to sneak a few out of the recycling lockup. Quite a few by the looks of all these batteries. That's the last thing I need, goblins with soft noses. The soft nose technique involved placing an inhibitor on a blaster, which allowed a laser to travel at slower speeds, actually penetrating the target. Initially developed for mining purposes, they were quickly adapted by some greedy weapons manufacturer. Artemis felt the uneasiness rolling in his gut. Funny how such an innocent image could be so foreboding. The camera panned upward, revealing a dull twilight sky. Then a black hunched object, in the distance. A rhythmic crunching issued through the compact speakers as the cameraman advanced through the snow. The object grew clearer. It was a man sitting on, no, tied to, a chair. The ice clinked in Artemis's glass. His hands were shaking. The man was dressed in the rags of a once fine suit. Scars branded the prisoner's face like lightning bolts, and one leg appeared to be missing. It was difficult to tell. Artemis's breath was jumpy now, like a marathon runner's. There was a sign around the man's neck. Cardboard and twine. On the sign was scrawled in thick black letters, Zdravstvuyutai Sin. The camera zoomed in on the message for several seconds, then went blank. Is that all? Butler nodded. Just the man, and the sign. That's it. Zdravstvuyutai Sin, muttered Artemis, his accent flawless. Since his father's disappearance, he had been teaching himself the language. Should I translate for you? Asked Butler, also a Russian speaker. His accent, however, was not quite so sophisticated. He had picked it up during a 5-year stint with an espionage unit in the late 80s. No, I know what it means, replied his young employer. Zdravstvuyutai syn, hello, son. Butler pulled the Bentley onto the divided highway. No one spoke for several minutes. Eventually Butler had to ask. Do you think it's him, Artemis? Could that man be your father? Artemis rewound the MPG, freezing it on the mysterious man's face. He touched the display, sending rainbow distortions across the screen. I think so, Butler. But the picture quality is too poor. I can't be certain. Butler understood the emotions battering his young charge. He, too, had lost someone aboard the Fowl Star. His uncle, the Major, had been assigned to Artemis's father on that fateful trip. Unfortunately, the Major's body had turned up in the Chesky morgue. Artemis regained his composure. I must pursue this, Butler. You know what's coming next, of course. Yes. A ransom demand. This is merely the teaser, to get my attention. I need to cash in some of the people's gold. Contact Lars in Zurich, immediately. Butler accelerated into the fast lane. Master Artemis, I have had some experience in these matters. Artemis did not interrupt. Butler's career before his current charge's birth had been varied, to say the least. The pattern with kidnappers is to eliminate all witnesses. Then they will generally try to eliminate each other, to avoid splitting the ransom. Your point being? My point being that paying a ransom in no way guarantees your father's safety. If indeed that man is your father, it is quite possible that the kidnappers will take your money and then kill all of us. Artemis studied the camera screen. You're right, of course. I will have to devise a plan. Butler swallowed. He remembered the last plan. It had almost gotten them all killed, and could have plunged the planet into an interspecies war. Butler was a man who didn't scare easily, but the spark in Artemis Fowl's eyes was enough to send a shiver crackling down his spine. The soft-nosers were just as quickly outlawed, for the obvious reason that these weapons were designed to kill, and not to incapacitate. Now and then one found its way into the hands of a gang member. But this did not look like an isolated case. This looked like somebody was planning something big. You know what the worrisome thing about this is, said Foley. No, said Root with deceptive calmness. Do tell me what the worrisome thing is. Foley turned the gun around. The way this weapon has been adapted to take a human battery. Very clever. There's no way a goblin figured this out on his own. But why adapt the soft-noses? Asked the commander. Why not just use the old solar cells? Those solar cells are very rare. They're worth their weight in gold. Antiques dealers use them to power all sorts of old gadgets. And it would be impossible to build a power cell factory of any kind without my senses picking up emissions. Much simpler just to steal them from the humans. Root lit one of his trademark fungal cigars. Tell me that's it. Tell me there's nothing else. Holly's gaze flickered to the rear of the hangar. Root caught the glance and pressed past the crates to the makeshift shuttle in the docking bay. The commander climbed into the craft. And what the hell is this, Foley? The Centaur ran a hand along the ship's hull. It's amazing. Unbelievable. They put a shuttle together from junk. I'm surprised this thing gets off the ground. The commander bit down hard on his fungus cigar. When you're finished admiring the goblins, Foley, maybe you can explain how the Biwakel got a hold of this stuff. I thought all outdated shuttle technology was supposed to be destroyed. That's what I thought. I retired some of this stuff myself. This starboard booster used to be in E1, until Captain Short blew it out last year. I remember signing the destruct order. Root spared a second to shoot Holly a withering glance. So now we have shuttle parts escaping the recycling smelters as well as soft-nose lasers. Find out how this shuttle got here. Take it apart, piece by piece. I want every strand of wire lasered for prints and DNA. Feed all the serial numbers into the mainframe, see if there are any common denominators. Foley nodded. Good idea. I'll get someone on it. No, Foley, you get on it. This is priority. So give your conspiracy theories a rest for a few days, and find me the inside fairy who's selling this junk. But, Julius, protested Foley. That's grunt work. Root took a step closer. 1. Don't call me Julius, civilian. And 2, I'd say it was more like donkey work. Foley noticed the vein pulsing in the commander's temple. Point taken, he said, removing a handheld computer from his belt. I'll get right on it. You do that. Now, Captain Short, what is our Biwakel prisoner saying? Holly shrugged. Nothing much, still unconscious. He'll be coughing soot for a month as soon he wakes up. Anyway, you know how the Biwakel works, the soldiers aren't told anything. This guy is just a grunt. It's a pity the book forbids using the mesmer on other fairies. Said Root, his face glowing redder than a baboon's behind. An even greater pity the Atlantis Convention outlawed truth drugs. Otherwise we could pump this convict full of serum until he sang like a drunken mud man. The commander took several deep breaths to calm down before his heart popped. Right now, we need to find out where these batteries came from, and if there are any more in the lower elements. Holly took a breath. I have a theory, sir. Don't tell me, groaned Root. Artemis Fowl, right. Who else could it be? I knew he'd be back. I knew it. You know the rules, Holly. He beat us last year. Game over. That's what the book says. Yes, sir, but that was a different game. New game, new rules. If Fowl is supplying power cells to the Biwakel, the least we can do is check it out. Root considered it. If Fowl was behind this, things could get very complicated very fast. I don't like the idea of interrogating Fowl on his turf. But we can't bring him down here. The pressure underground would kill him. Holly disagreed. Not if we keep him in a secure environment. The city is equalized. So are the shuttles. Okay, go, the commander said at last. Bring him in for a little chat. Bring the big one, too. Butler. Yes, Butler. Root paused. But remember, we're going to run a few scans, Holly, that's it. I don't want you using this as an oppo.